Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mabel Elmore, and I'm BC's Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism Initiatives. I'm honored to be here today on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I want to thank all of you for being here with us today as we mark Yom Ha'Shoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. We're gathering with people across the world to remember the approximately 6 million who were murdered during the Holocaust. And we're standing with the survivors here today. For most of us, the horrors they have faced are unimaginable. That's why it's so important that we come together to remember, but also to resolve to work to ensure that the horrors of the past never happen again. Today, we're joined by Premier David Eby. We'll also hear from Michael Lee, MLA for Vancouver-Langara and representative of the BC United Caucus, and Sonia Furstenau, leader of the BC Green Party. To remember and honor the victims, some of our community's Holocaust survivors will join us in a candle lighting ceremony. Following the ceremony, Rabbi Susan Tendler from the Beth Tikva congregation in Richmond will offer a prayer. Holocaust survivor Peter Sudfeld will share a few words. And Nichama Furtzman, Julia Herzog, and Lucilla Nirenberg will help us close with a song. I'd now like to invite Songhees Nation member Teresa Novak to help us open in a good way.
Good afternoon. I am Teresa. I am an elder of the Songhees Nation. I am from the Lekwungen people. I have been asked here by my nation to come here and welcome each and every one of you. I am new at finding my voice, and I know how important this work is to do. I would like to thank you all for allowing this time to follow cultural protocols on our lands. You just witnessed a blanket ceremony that happens at every welcome to signify that I am the speaker and that what words I speak are coming from the heart. You are on the lands of the Lekwungen people. We are a joint gathering of two nations, Esquimalt and Songhees. We were one before treaties and borders. I will give you a welcome in Lekwungen, then in English. Cha'eslasin at Lekwungen, Heichka Quintsela, Heichka Quintsela at Lanuk at Lekwungen, Heichka Siam. I will now explain what I just said. Good day, respected everybody. I am Teresa. I am from Lekwungen. I welcome you all to the homelands of the Lekwungen people. Thank you for being here, and all respected ones. Heichka, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa Elder-Novak, for that special welcome. Now, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Premier Eby to say a few words and to present the ceremonial certificates recognizing this important day.
Good afternoon, everyone. We gather on this most solemn occasion on the territory of Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And I want to thank Elder Novak for getting us started in a good way. We're joining people in British Columbia and around the world today in observing Yom Ha'Shoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. We gather today, of course, to remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. It's a crime that still shocks the conscience of the world. This is a sacred day of remembrance. The magnitude of the number of 6 million is overwhelming. All murdered, a heinous crime. A number so great, we must always remember the victims as individuals, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, grandfathers and grandmothers, neighbors, friends. Millions of others were murdered because of their ethnicity, their sexual identity, disability, or opposition to the Nazi regime. Entire families destroyed, entire communities wiped out. On this day, we stand with survivors and their families. To the survivors, we honor you. We honor your strength, and we join you in mourning those lost in the Shoah. We remember the dead and tell their stories so that their memory may be a blessing. We also remember the survivors, including those who came to British Columbia, among them Rudolf Verba. Born in Slovakia as Walter Rosenberg, he escaped certain death in Auschwitz to warn his fellow Jews of the death camps. His bravery saved the lives of untold tens of thousands of other people. 20 years after the war, he settled in Vancouver as an associate pharmacology professor at the University of British Columbia. The survivors carry a burden. Not only have they suffered loss, but they also bore witness to the crime that they survived. Recognition of this genocide has never been more important. The malevolent forces responsible for this great crime continue to march. To the horror of all decent people, anti-Semitism remains a scourge in our society. A monstrous hatred still spreads its poison. It cannot be eradicated, it seems, so it must be confronted, challenged, and defeated again. As British Columbians, it is all of our responsibility to stand up against anti-Semitism whenever we encounter it. In the face of lies, in the face of denial and distortion, Holocaust education remains essential. The Holocaust reminds us of what happens when good people remain silent in the face of hatred. The Jewish community here in BC and around the world remains a target of hate crimes. This is unacceptable. It must not be tolerated. Our government will continue to address anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination in all their ugly forms. On this day, we must once again dedicate ourselves to building a more just and equitable province where everyone is safe. The horrors of the past are a reminder to the present of the consequences of complacency in the face of evil. So it's with steadfast resolution and heartfelt dedication we must make the pledge, never again. At this time, I'd like to invite two community leaders up to accept these ceremonial certificates recognizing April 18th, 2023 as Holocaust Memorial Day in British Columbia. Sharon Fitch, President of the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island, and Jeffrey Drucker, Chair of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs Pacific Region Leadership Council. Please come forward.
Thank you, Premier. Next, I'd like to invite Michael Lee, MLA for Vancouver Langara and member of the BC United Caucus, to say a few words. Michael.
Good afternoon. I join the members of the Legislative Assembly and the Premier to mark this solemn occasion. And I know that here in this Hall of Honor, it's a place of great respect. Respect for those survivors who've come here to be in this place, to remind us of one of the darkest chapters in human history, the killing of 6 million Jews, other non-Jews, disabled, LGBTQ2S+, peoples. The persecution and the suffering, the human condition that affected so many peoples in our world for generations that you carry with you, your memories of your grandparents, your parents, your children, your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, your cousins, your sisters. But I know that here, in this place, when we mark this day as a solemn occasion, I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to reflect. Because just like 80 years ago tomorrow, when those Jewish fighters rose up in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to make the sacrifice and say no, those civilians, those members fought hard as the Jewish resistance. We mark that occasion on April 19th, 1943. We recognize, and I would say that my wife and I recently had the opportunity to visit a Holocaust museum, as we've done in the past and in the last few months. And I would say to recognize the photos and the history of the Warsaw Ghetto, the conditions, and actually, quite frankly, the joys of that community and how it was ripped apart in the days that led up to April 19th, 1943, and continued on for another good month in that resistance. We know that we've had so many others, the righteous among nations, that have made sacrifices, sacrificed their lives, risked their lives to help Jewish and non-Jewish people fight the tragedies, the killings, the hands of the Nazis in the Holocaust. And I know that I'm grateful for those community leaders that join us here from Vancouver, from Victoria, and across our province, because as elected representatives, including the members of our BC United Caucus, you give us strength. You give us strength to stand up against the continuing injustices. And I know that the work of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Centre, which is in my riding of Vancouver-Langara, will see a new centre built. But it does very important work to educate the young and the public. In the Hillel House at UBC, on our university campuses, we know that with the rise of continued forces in social media, the license that has been provided by certain leaders outside of Canada and inside Canada, that we have to be ever vigilant against anti-Semitism. When I was attending the commemoration of Yom Ha'Shoah yesterday at the Jewish Community Center, yesterday evening, I was struck, as I am on many occasions when Irvin Kotler adds his voice to these commemorations. And one phrase that I know others have heard here before, that just as today is an act of remembrance, let us all remember that we must remember to act. And I think, to those survivors amongst us here today, that you provide us with that fundamental reminder that we must act. That action here in British Columbia has been something that I've said for the years that I've been elected here as an MLA, that we must adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism here in this province. We have seen in the years that have passed over the last 6 years, the federal government do it, the province of Ontario, the province of Manitoba. I hope that one day that will be adopted here in British Columbia, certainly under a BC United government. We can assure you of that. But we know the importance of that IRA definition. We know the importance of the many examples, the illustrative examples that it sets out, that it's an important leading tool internationally to define what anti-Semitism is. So there is no debate amongst government officials, amongst those who are employed in the public service, in our institutions, on our streets. I know, again, that I'm grateful for how we see the leadership of the Jewish community, Tikkun Olam, to make this world a better place. And so as we mark this occasion today, let us all remember that we must take action to make this world a better place for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now I welcome Sonia Furstenau, leader of the BC Green Party, to say a few words.
Thank you. I am moved and humbled and honored to be here today to commemorate Yom Ha'Shoah, to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, the 6 million Jewish people who were murdered, to commemorate the survivors and the descendants of the survivors, because the harms carry on. Growing up and through adulthood, I heard the words and said the words, never again. In our family, never again, were the words that we said when it came to the Holocaust. Never again can we let this happen. They represented a pledge for us as humanity to never let such violence occur, to prevent discrimination, to prevent hatred, and critically, to prevent anti-Semitism from taking hold again in this world. Never again means commemorating the people who lost their lives in the Holocaust, commemorating the survivors, and telling the story over and over again. As a teacher of history, it was my duty and my responsibility every April to bring a survivor into my classrooms so that my students would learn firsthand the implications of the Holocaust. Never again is not passive, it is active. It is all of us who must ensure that this never happens. We have a collective responsibility to name and address the hateful rhetoric that Jewish people continue to face. Saying never again, though, is not enough. We must stand up together to intolerance, actively foster humanity, respect, tolerance, and love. We must strengthen awareness and bolster education so that future generations learn about the horrors of the Holocaust. We must foster belonging and diversity in communities. The rise in hatred and discrimination that we are seeing goes against everything that we must value as a society and as humanity. Combating hatred needs to be the work that we do every day. Today represents a moment to reflect on the past, to continue our pledge to resist hate and anti-Semitism in all forms and in all of our communities. work daily to ensure our communities are vibrant, inclusive places for everybody to call home. We must ultimately all choose to live and lead with love. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. It's a Jewish tradition to light a candle on the anniversary of the loved one's passing to remember them. So today, we join in that tradition by lighting candles in memory of those lost. One for each of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, and one in honor of the non-Jewish victims. We're getting set up here. Okay. All right. Coming over. Thank you. Okay. We've got to light the candles. I'd like to now invite Professor Rabinovich to light our first candle. All right. Light the candle and take that. Professor? Okay. Professor, you come and take it from the Premier. Thank you. Lighting that. Place it on the table. Thank you. And you can stand or you can sit down, whatever you're comfortable with. Thank you very much, Professor. Next, Holocaust survivor Leo Vogel will light the second candle. Take the second candle. Leo's parents made the heart-wrenching decision to hand him over to a Christian family for hiding, a decision that undoubtedly saved his life. Tragically, his parents were soon deported to Auschwitz, and there they were murdered. Thank you, Leo. And now we welcome Peter Sudfeld, who is our keynote speaker today and is a Holocaust survivor, as well as Professor Emeritus in the Department of Psychology at UBC. Peter, please come up with the lighted third candle. Thank you. You can join us here if you're comfortable. And now to light our fourth candle, we have Magda Rosen. Magda, come up, okay. The candle. Thank you. Place it there. And Esther Golger will light the fifth candle. Esther. Thank you. And now I'll invite Vladislav Kudak to light the sixth candle. Vlad. Okay. And in memory of the non-Jewish victims, including members from the Roma, Slavic, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities, as well as people with disabilities who were also killed in the Holocaust, Aneth Leyland, who is an immigration consultant and paralegal program instructor, is stepping in on behalf of her brother, Peter Sixay, president of the Canadian Romani Alliance, and we will light the seventh candle. Join us here at the safe. Yep, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I now invite Rabbi Tendler from the Beth Tikva congregation in Richmond to share a few words. And would you like to have your seats now? Yeah. You can stand or you can take your seats as you're comfortable. Rabbi will lead us in the Lamalai, Ramayim, and Kaddish Prayer, and also the Morning Prayer. Okay, Rabbi. Thank you. I'm honored to be here with all of you
today as we commemorate Yom Ha'Shoah. It's traditional as we remember those who perished to recite the memorial prayer. But as we do so, I think we would be remiss if we only think of Yom Ha'Shoah simply as Yom Ha'Shoah. As was mentioned, the day was chosen. How do you choose one day of all of the years of atrocity? But the day was chosen in connection with tomorrow and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And so the full name of Yom Ha'Shoah is Yom Ha'Shoah Gvura, the day in which we remember all who perished in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, as well as the many acts of resistance, of bravery, and heroism. And as we remember those who perished, let us all remember as well the acts of bravery. I'm honored to be joined today by Aaron Gutman, the son of Chaim and Manya, both of whom were survivors, and Aaron himself was born in Mittenwald in a camp, and who will join me in the Kaddish in just a moment. But first, I ask if you're physically able and capable to please rise for the memorial prayer. Om lerachamim shochem bamromim Hamsei menucha nechona Tacha kamfei hashchina V'malo kodeshim atarim kazar rakia masyirim Et nishmot kol achinu b'nei Yisrael Anashim nashim v'taf Shenitbechu v'shenechnechu v'shenisrafu v'shenehargu v'shalchu la'olamam Began Eden menuchatam Anabal rachamim Astirem beseter kamfecha la'olamim Utzror bitzror Achayim enishmotehem Adonai hu nachlatam V'yanuchu v'shalom amishkavotehem V'nomar Amen. El Malay Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the souls of all of our people, the men, women, and children of Israel, who were slaughtered, who were gassed, who were burned to ashes, and who were wrenched out of this world and have now gone to their eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved ones find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say,
Amen.
The words of the Kaddish in this form are interspersed with the names of various death camps. So as I recite the words of the traditional memorial prayer, Aaron will intersperse with the camps. Yit Gadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yit Kadash,
Lodz,
Shemei Rabbah,
Pona,
Ba'alma Divrach Yerutei,
Babi Yar,
V'yimlich Malchutei,
Majdanek,
V'chayachon Uvimechon,
Birkenau,
V'chayed Chol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv,
Yanovska,
V'nimar Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam Omei Maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach,
Theresienstadt,
v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam,
Buchenwald,
v'yitnaseh v'yithadar,
Treblinka,
v'yitalev v'yitalal,
Vilna,
shemei dekudasha,
Bergen-Belsen,
berichu le'ela,
Mauthausen,
min kol birchata v'shirata,
Dachau,
tushbachata v'nechamata,
Minsk,
da'amiram b'alma,
Warschau,
v'yimru
Amen.
Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shamaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Rabbi. Now it's my honor to welcome Peter Sudfeld back to share his thoughts and experiences with us.
This is, as other speakers have said, Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom Ha'Shoah. It commemorates many important and unforgettable events, each of which involve the fates of millions of people in many places around the world. Three of these events are the topics of what I'm going to speak about. The three events are a tragedy, resilience, and resistance. The tragedy, of course, is the Holocaust itself. History's only example of a modern, well-organized, well-equipped nation that undertook to first vilify, then dehumanize, rob, and eventually massacre millions of law-abiding, peaceful people who lived among them, its own citizens and others, and eventually Jews throughout Europe and anywhere else that the Nazi power could reach. Beginning 90 years ago, German soldiers, police, and ordinary citizens participated in mobile killing squads, extermination camps, death marches, and street assaults at random against their neighbors, against their friends, their colleagues, their teachers, their students, and even against relatives, regardless of their age, sex, position in society, courageous performance as soldiers in World War I, their politics, or even their religion, because devout lay people, priests, nuns, clergy, were persecuted as Jews, even if their families had been Christian for several generations. This was a first. Previous anti-Semitic pogroms and massacres usually spared those who had converted to Christianity or to another religion and did not persecute them as Jews. The Nazis broke ground on that. The Nazis and their allies succeeded in killing, as we have heard, some 6 million of the almost 10 million Jews in Europe, 60%. They also murdered about 93% of Jewish children that came into their power. Over 1 million, between 1.5 million young children. That is the tragedy. The resistance was the act that we are here to honor specifically today. That is, the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began exactly 80 years from tomorrow, on April 19th, 1943. After about 265,000 people had been deported and sent to their deaths from the ghetto in Warsaw, mostly in Auschwitz, about 700 Jewish, young, mostly young, resistance fighters, armed with smuggled pistols, rifles, and homemade grenades, took on a force of about 2,000 German troops, armed with modern military weapons and backed by artillery and tanks. They held out against that force for almost a month. In that month, before the uprising ended, an estimated 300 German troops were killed and 7,000 Jews. Not only the fighters, but also civilians who were residents of the ghetto. Some 50,000 Jewish survivors, after the military operation had ended, were arrested and evacuated and sent to various death camps where most of them were murdered before the end of the war. This was the largest and the most famous example of armed Jewish resistance, but it was by no means the only one. There were many others. In Sobibor death camp, a resistance organization killed 11 SS troopers, and about 300 prisoners escaped. Most were found and recaptured and executed, but about 50 survived the war. In Auschwitz, Jewish women slave laborers in an ammunition factory smuggled gunpowder to male prisoners who were working in a crematorium. The crematorium was blown up. There was an attempt at a revolt, but it was put down by the guards. And hundreds of prisoners, including the heroic women, were either killed in the fighting or executed afterwards. Many Jews, including one of my uncles, fought in partisan bands that they had either formed themselves or joined after escaping from various Nazi institutions. There were many individual acts of resistance as well. The post-war depiction of the Jews as submitting like sheep, helpless, and not resisting to the killers is false, and it's also demeaning. Now, the resilience. At the liberation of the camps and ghettos at the end of the war, many survivors were close to death from starvation, freezing, lack of adequate shelter and clothing, extremely hard work, lack of medical care of any sort, and so on. The physicians and psychologists who examined them were just awed by the information that they received from their patients. They could not take in the possibility that anybody could be so mistreated and survive intact. They predicted that the survivors would never regain their mental or physical health. They would be unable to live normal lives. They would be unable to establish warm personal relations with other people. They would never be able to engage in productive work or to overcome their disabilities, their anxiety, their depression, their paranoid fear, their obsessive thoughts and nightmares, or enjoy any aspect of their life. This is now a diagnosis of anhedonia, inability to enjoy. Child survivors, in particular, would be unable to grow into fully functioning, happy, healthy adults, and would probably spend most of their time, most of their life, in mental hospitals. Well, the research does not bear that out. Although some survivors and child survivors and adults, of course, did not ever regain their health, sadly, but most of all of the survivors did. Although they all have traumatic memories, they have been able to find new homes in a new land, new country, often a country that, like Canada, fought to defeat the Nazis. These refugees were grateful, determined to integrate into the new society, to learn the language and the ways of the new country, and to contribute to it. Child survivors wanted to become, as Rob Krell, one of us, has said more Canadian than Canadian kids. And the equivalent was true in other nations as well. Most survivors established stable, loving families. Most survivors went to work and stayed at work, and most of them reached levels of employment about in the category of middle class or upper middle class. And the educational level of child survivors was high, with many entering scientific or the helping professions. At least one child survivor in every category of the Nobel Prizes won it. Every one of the 6 categories of the Nobel Prizes, at least one went to a child survivor. 60 years later, the eminent historian Sir Martin Gilbert interviewed a group of child survivors of the Buchenwald death camp. And here's what he wrote about them, quote, "Their stories are essentially those of the triumph of the human spirit after being confronted by the worst evils perpetrated by members of the human race on their fellow human beings." Unquote. It is customary to end a talk like this, or any talk, by thanking the audience for their presence and their attention. In this case, I think, at least for us survivors, the gratitude goes far beyond that, and it is heartfelt rather than merely formal. We thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your remarks and your reflections and really capturing the day of tragedy, but also resistance and inspiration, resilience of the Jewish people, and really embracing humanity moving forward. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to welcome Nechama Firstman to sing Eli Eli. And we've also got Lucilla Narenberg and Julia Herzog. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
Just a little tune-up, folks. The poetry that is this song was written by Hannah Senesh. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't review exactly. But she was a partisan. And she flew over Hungary and was shot down. I'll read it here. She was born in Hungary, emigrated to Israel at the age of 18. During the Second World War, she volunteered for a secret mission with the British Air Force and parachuted into Yugoslavia to make contact with the resistant forces and to help rescue Jews. She was captured and executed.
שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם.
Dedicated to my mom, who's a survivor.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Nichama, Julia, Lucilla. That was really beautiful. You touched our hearts and our spirits. I invite each of you to take this moment to remember the millions of victims and their families. And commit to fulfilling the pledge, never again, by standing against anti-Semitism and racism, discrimination, hate in all forms, so we can build a brighter future for our children and our children's children, while continuing to honor the lives of those we lost and making sure their stories are never forgotten. Thank you for joining us here today. I invite everybody to stay and remain, and we have some light refreshments for everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you to the survivors. Thank you to the community. We will continue. Thank you, everyone.